There is a conversation that almost every family knows they need to have, and almost every family puts off until it's too late to have it well. You know the one. It's the conversation about what happens when your parent can't fully manage on their own anymore, about where they'll live, who'll help, what they want, what they can afford, what they'd never want. It's the conversation sitting in the middle of the family like a piece of furniture everyone walks around and no one mentions. And here is the cruel irony of it. The longer you wait to have this conversation, the worse the conditions become for having it. Because if you don't choose the moment gets chosen for you. By a fall, by a diagnosis, by a hospital bed, by a crisis that forces every decision at once, at the worst possible time, when everyone is frightened and exhausted and grieving. The families who suffer most are not the ones who have hard conversations. They're the ones who avoid them until an emergency has them instead. So today, I'm going to walk you through how to actually have this conversation, the one every family avoids. Not in vague terms, but step by step. I'll show you when to have it, and why the timing matters more than you think. I'll show you where and how to open it, because the setup determines whether it goes well or blows up in the first 30 seconds. I'll give you the exact things to say, and just as important, the things never to say. And I'll show you how to handle it when your parent shuts it down, gets angry, or refuses to engage, because many of them will at first. And at the very end, I'm going to give you the single most important principle of the entire conversation. The one thing that, if you get it right, makes everything else easier, and if you get it wrong, dooms the whole attempt no matter how well you've prepared. So stay with me to the end for that. Or, let's start with the question of when. The single biggest mistake families make with this conversation is one of timing. And it's this: they wait until they need to have it. They wait until there's a problem, a decline, a scare, and then they try to have the conversation in the shadow of that crisis. This is exactly backwards. The best time to have this conversation is when you don't need to have it yet. When your parent is still healthy, still independent, still fully in command of their own life. Here's why. When there's no immediate problem, the conversation isn't threatening. You're not telling your parent they can't cope. You're not reacting to a fall or a failure. You're two adults calmly talking about the future, while it's still safely in the future. There's no accusation in it, no loss of face, nothing to defend against. But the moment there's a crisis, everything about the conversation changes. Now it's loaded. Now every suggestion sounds like, "You've failed." Every question sounds like, "We're taking over." And your parents' defenses go all the way up because their independence is under active threat. So if your parent is healthy right now, and you're tempted to think, "There's no rush, we'll deal with it when we have to," that thought is the trap. The absence of a crisis is not a reason to delay the conversation. It's the ideal condition for having it. The best time is now, precisely because you don't need it yet. Let me show you the two versions side by side, because the contrast makes it undeniable. In the first, a family never talks about any of this. Everyone knows they should, and everyone quietly assumes there's time. Then one evening, their father has a stroke. Within hours, the family is standing in a hospital corridor being asked questions they've never discussed. Does he have a healthcare directive? Would he want to be kept on a ventilator? If he survives but can't live alone, where does he go? Who has power of attorney? Who's paying for what? Nobody knows. The siblings, frightened and grieving, start to disagree. One insists Dad would never want to be in a facility. Another says they can't possibly care for him at home. And old resentments they've buried for 30 years come flooding up at the worst imaginable moment. They end up making enormous irreversible decisions in a state of panic, half of them guessing at what their father would have wanted, all of them later haunted by whether they got it right. That is the conversation an emergency has for you. Now the second version. A different family whose daughter, on an ordinary Sunday 2 years earlier, took a walk with her father and gently asked him what he'd want if things ever changed. It was a little awkward. It took a few tries over a few months. But by the time that father had his own health crisis, the family knew. They knew where he wanted to be, what he'd never want, where the documents were, who was in charge. The crisis was still painful. Of course it was, but it wasn't chaos, and it wasn't guesswork, and the siblings weren't at war because the hard decisions had already been made calmly by the person they actually belonged to. Same crisis, two completely different experiences. The only difference was one uncomfortable walk, 2 years early. But let's be honest, many of you watching are already past that ideal window. There's already been a scare, a decline, a reason you're here. If that's you, don't despair. The second best time is still today. Even in less than ideal conditions, a calm conversation you initiate on a good day is far better than the forced one an emergency will hand you later. The principle holds either way. Choose the moment yourself on a calm day rather than letting the next crisis choose it for you. Whenever you're watching this, the best available moment is the next quiet, ordinary, pressure-free day you can find. Don't wait for a better one. There isn't one coming. Now, where and how to open it, because the setup matters enormously. First, the setting. This is not a conversation to have across a table in a formal, sit-down, we need to talk ambush. Nothing puts a person on the defensive faster than being summoned to a serious talk about themselves. The best versions of this conversation happen sideways. In the car, on a long drive, on a walk, while doing the dishes together, in the easy, shoulder-to-shoulder moments where there's no intense eye contact and no sense of an interrogation. Side by side is less threatening than face-to-face. Choose a calm, private, unhurried moment when neither of you is stressed or rushed, when there's time to let it breathe and no pressure to resolve anything. And crucially, do not have this conversation when either of you is upset, tired, or in the middle of some other conflict. The emotional weather has to be calm for this to work. Second, who's in the room? Be very careful about numbers. A parent surrounded by all their adult children at once can feel ganged up on, like the family has convened a tribunal to decide their fate. For the first conversation, it's often best if it's just one person, the child the parent is closest to, or the one who communicates with them most easily. One-on-one is intimate and safe. A crowd is intimidating. There's a time to involve the whole family, but the opening conversation is usually better kept small. Third, how to actually open it, because the first sentence sets the tone for everything after. Do not open with a problem. Do not open with, "We need to talk about what happens when you can't take care of yourself." That's an ambush, and it triggers every defense your parent has. Instead, open in a way that's non-threatening and puts them in control. There are a few good ways in. One is to lead with your own planning. "Mum, I've been getting my own affairs in order, my will, what I'd want if something happened to me, and it got me thinking I don't actually know what you'd want. Can we talk about it sometime?" This is brilliant because it normalizes the conversation, makes it mutual rather than about their decline, and removes the sting. Another way in is to use someone else's story. "You know, my friend's father got sick suddenly, and the whole family was lost because they'd never talked about what he wanted. It made me realize we've never talked about it either. A third is simply to ask permission. There's something I'd like to understand about what you'd want for the future. Is it okay if we talk about it? No pressure, and it's completely your call. Whatever the opening, the goal is the same. Make it feel safe, mutual, unhurried, and entirely under their control. You are not announcing decisions. You are asking to understand. Let me give you a concrete picture of the lead with your own planning approach, because it's the most reliable of the three, and it's worth seeing in motion. A daughter wanted to talk to both her parents, but knew a direct approach would put them on guard. They were proud, private people who hated any suggestion they couldn't manage. So she didn't approach them about them at all. She came to them for advice. She said she and her husband had just done their own wills and healthcare directives, and honestly, it had been overwhelming and a little scary, and she wanted to ask how they'd handled it, whether they had any wisdom about it. Notice what that does. Now she's not the child implying her parents are declining. She's the daughter seeking her parents' guidance, which flatters rather than threatens and keeps them firmly in the role of the capable elders. As they talked about their own arrangements to help her, the conversation naturally drifted into what they'd want, where things stood, what they'd thought about. She barely had to steer it. By coming in sideways through her own planning, she got further in one afternoon than years of "we need to talk about you" ever could have. The lesson: the least threatening door is almost always the one that doesn't start with your parents' decline at all. Start with the future as a thing you're all navigating together, not a problem they represent. Now, once the door is open, what do you actually talk about? And just as important, what's the right posture to hold the whole way through? The posture is everything, so let me be clear about it. You are not there to solve, decide, or convince. You are there to understand. Your entire job in this first conversation is to ask, and then to listen, really listen, to what your parent wants, not what you think is best, not the plan you've already made in your head, what they want. Because a parent who feels heard will engage. A parent who feels managed will shut down. So you ask open questions, and you let them lead. What matters most to you as you get older? Where do you picture yourself living? What are you most worried about? Is there anything you'd absolutely never want? Have you thought about what you'd want if you needed help with day-to-day things? If something happened suddenly, would I know what you'd want? These are not questions with right answers. They're invitations for your parent to tell you who they are and what they fear and hope for. And your job, while they answer, is to say very little, to resist the urge to jump in with solutions, to resist the urge to correct or reassure too quickly, and simply to hear them. This first conversation is not for reaching conclusions. It's for opening a door and understanding what's on the other side of it. If you come away having truly understood one thing your parent wants that you didn't know before, the conversation was a success. Let me give you the specific things to say, the phrases that open people up, and then the things never to say, the phrases that slam the door. Things that open the door tend to center the parent's wishes and control. What would you want? What matters most to you? I want to understand, not take over. These are your decisions. I just want to be able to help you carry them out. I'm on your side, whatever you choose. There's no rush and no pressure. I just want to know. These work because every one of them reassures your parent that they remain in charge, that you're an ally and not a threat, that honesty is safe. Now the things that slam the door, the phrases to strike from your vocabulary entirely. You can't keep living like this. You need to face reality. We've decided that it's for your own good. You're not able to do that anymore. We're worried about you, said, in that heavy, hovering way that makes a person feel like a patient. Every one of these, however true, however loving in intent, lands as an attack on your parents' autonomy and identity and provokes exactly the defensiveness that ends the conversation. The difference between the two lists is simple. The first keeps your parent in the driver's seat. The second yanks them out of it. Same concern underneath. Opposite result. Now let's talk about what happens when it doesn't go smoothly, because for many of you, it won't, at least not the first time. Your parent may shut it down. They may say, "I don't want to talk about this," and change the subject. They may get angry or hurt or wave you off with, "I'm fine, stop worrying." What do you do then? The first rule is, do not push. If you force the conversation against a wall of resistance, you don't get through the wall. You just make it thicker, and you teach your parent that this subject is a battleground. So when you hit real resistance, you retreat gracefully. You say something like, "That's okay. We don't have to talk about it now. I just want you to know I'm here whenever you're ready, and there's no pressure." And then you actually let it go. Here's what most families don't understand. The first attempt is rarely the real conversation. The first attempt is planting a seed. You've raised the subject, you've shown you can raise it without attacking, and you've left the door open. Very often, your parent needs time to sit with it, and the real conversation happens weeks later, when they bring it up themselves, on their own terms, having decided they're ready. Your job on the first try is not to finish the conversation. It's to make the subject sayable and to prove you can be trusted with it. So plant the seed, retreat without resentment, and try again another day. Persistence in this is gentle and patient, not forceful. You're wearing down a wall with water, not a hammer. Here's how that patience actually pays off, because it's worth seeing. Think of a son who tried to raise this with his mother and got nowhere. She waved him off, said she didn't want to be morbid, changed the subject to the grandchildren. A lot of people would have taken that as failure and either given up or pushed harder until it became a fight. He did neither. He said lightly, "Okay, no pressure, I'm here whenever," and dropped it completely. He didn't sulk about it, didn't bring it up again the next week, didn't make her feel cornered. He just let the seed sit. And about 2 months later, out of nowhere, over coffee, his mother said, "You know, I've been thinking about what you asked me. There are some things I want you to know." She had needed the time. She had needed to arrive at it herself, on her own terms, without feeling pushed. And because he hadn't forced the first attempt, she trusted him enough to open the second one herself. And that time, it was real, and deep, and everything he'd hoped for. That is what plant the seed and retreat actually looks like when it works. The first conversation that seems to fail is very often not a failure at all. It's the thing that makes the real conversation possible later. But only if you retreat with grace instead of resentment, and only if you leave the door genuinely open instead of slamming it on your way out. And when your parent does get angry or emotional, resist the urge to match it or to defend yourself. The anger is almost never really about you. It's fear wearing the mask of anger, fear of aging, of losing control, of mortality itself. So don't argue with the anger. Acknowledge the feeling underneath it. I know this is hard to think about. I don't like thinking about it either. I'm not trying to upset you. I just love you, and I want to understand. When you meet fear disguised as anger with calm and warmth instead of counterattack, you take the charge out of it. You show your parent that this subject doesn't have to be a fight, and that, over time, is what makes them willing to come back to it. There's another obstacle I have to prepare you for, and it's the one inside your own family, siblings who don't agree. Often the hardest part of this isn't the parent at all. It's that you and your brothers or sisters see the situation differently, or want different things, or carry old rivalries that come roaring back the moment a parent's care is on the table. One sibling thinks everything's fine, and you're overreacting. Another lives far away and has opinions, but does none of the work. Another can't bear to face it at all. If your family is like this, here's the key. Try to get the siblings aligned before you bring the united front to your parent, not during. Have the hard sibling conversations separately, out of your parent's sight, and work toward at least a rough agreement on the approach. Because nothing frightens and destabilizes an aging parent more than watching their children argue about them over their head as if they weren't there. Present calm and present it together. And if you truly can't align, if the family is too fractured, then it may be worth bringing in a neutral third party, a mediator, a geriatric care manager, someone whose presence lowers the temperature and keeps old wounds from hijacking a conversation that's supposed to be about your parents' future. I want to be specific about how sibling conflict sabotages this, because if you see it coming, you can prevent it. The classic pattern goes like this. There's the child who lives nearby and does most of the caregiving, who sees the daily reality and knows something has to change. There's the child who lives far away, sees the parent twice a year, and insists everything's fine, because on their brief visits, the parent rallies and performs wellness, and the distant child hasn't watched the slow decline up close. And there's often a third who simply can't cope with the emotional weight, and copes by denying, deflecting, or disappearing. Now imagine all three in a room with the parent, trying to have this conversation cold. The near child says, "Mom needs help." The far child says the near child is exaggerating and overstepping. The parent, watching her children argue about her as if she's not there, feels humiliated and frightened and shuts down entirely. And now the conversation is not only failed, but poisoned. And Mom has learned that this subject brings chaos, so she'll resist it even harder next time. Here's how the same family avoids that. The near child calls the far child first, privately, well before anyone talks to Mom. Not to win, but to share what they're actually seeing, patiently, maybe over several calls. The far child is invited to visit for longer, to see past the performance. The siblings work, out of the parent's sight, toward a shared understanding, or at least a shared commitment to stay calm and united in front of her. Only then, aligned and unhurried, do they bring the conversation to their mother. The order matters enormously. Align the siblings first, then approach the parent. Reverse that order, and you're not having one hard conversation. You're having two at once, and they'll wreck each other. I also want to name the emotional weight this carries for you, the adult child, because it's real and it's heavy, and pretending otherwise doesn't help. Having this conversation means looking directly at something you may have been avoiding for good reason. The fact that your parent is aging, that the relationship is changing, that the people who took care of you now need taking care of, and that one day they won't be here at all. That's grief, arriving early before anyone has died. It's completely natural to avoid this conversation, not because you're irresponsible, but because having it means feeling that grief. So be gentle with yourself. The discomfort you feel is not weakness, it's love, confronting loss. And the courage to have the conversation anyway, through the discomfort, is one of the most loving things you can do. Because the alternative, the avoided conversation, doesn't spare you the grief. It just guarantees you'll feel it later, all at once, in the middle of a crisis, along with the added anguish of not knowing what your parent would have wanted. Let me also give you a realistic picture of how this actually unfolds, because Hollywood has ruined our expectations. This is not one dramatic, tearful, resolving conversation where everything gets decided and everyone hugs. That's not how it works, and if you expect that, you'll be discouraged when you don't get it. In reality, this is many small conversations over months, even years. It's a subject you return to again and again, a little at a time, each time going slightly deeper. The first conversation opens the door a crack. The next one opens it a bit more. Over time, across many ordinary moments, you build up a full picture of what your parent wants, and you build up the trust that lets you act on it when the time comes. So take the pressure off yourself to get it all done in one sitting. You're not having the conversation. You're starting an ongoing conversation that will continue for as long as you're lucky enough to have your parent. Small, patient, repeated. That's the shape of it. And practically, as these conversations unfold, there are concrete things worth capturing along the way, gently, without turning it into paperwork. What are your parents' wishes about where they'd live if they needed help? Do they have their legal documents in order? A will, a power of attorney, a healthcare directive? And do you know where they are? Who are their doctors? And what medications do they take? What are their finances, in broad strokes, so that if you ever had to step in, you wouldn't be starting from zero in a crisis? You don't extract all of this in one interrogation. You gather it slowly, naturally, as trust grows. But knowing these things before an emergency is the difference between stepping in smoothly and scrambling in the dark. The conversation isn't only about feelings. It's also, eventually, about making sure that if the day comes when you need to help, you actually can. Let me make that practical side vivid, because families underestimate how much of a crisis is made worse purely by not knowing basic things. When a parent is suddenly incapacitated and no one has ever gathered this information, the adult children find themselves playing a frantic scavenger hunt at the worst moment of their lives. Where is the will? Is there even a will? Who is the lawyer, if there is one? Which bank? Which accounts? What passwords? Is there a healthcare directive stating what your parent would and wouldn't want? And where on earth is it? Who is the doctor? And what are all these medications? Is there long-term care insurance, a pension, benefits they're entitled to? Does anyone have legal authority to make decisions or handle money on your parents' behalf? Or will the family have to go to court to get it, at enormous cost and delay? Every one of these questions, unanswered in a crisis, adds days of scrambling, thousands in avoidable expense, and a crushing layer of stress on top of an already unbearable situation. And every one of them could have been answered calmly, in advance, as a natural part of these ongoing conversations. So as trust builds, gently make sure you know where the important documents are, who the key professionals are, what the broad financial picture looks like, and whether the legal authority to step in exists before you need it. You're not being intrusive or morbid. You're making sure that your love can actually be translated into action on the day it's needed, instead of being trapped behind a locked drawer no one has the key to. Now, before I give you that single, most important principle I promised, let me gather what we've covered, because the shape of it matters. Have the conversation early, before you need it. On a calm day, you choose, rather than when a crisis chooses for you. Set it up gently, side by side, unhurried, one-on-one, opened in a way that keeps your parent in control. Hold the posture of understanding, not solving. Ask and listen and want their wishes more than your plan. Use the words that keep them in the driver's seat and banish the words that yank them out of it. When you hit resistance, retreat without resentment and plant the seed for next time. Handle anger as the fear it really is. Align your siblings out of sight. Expect not one conversation, but many, and gather the practical pieces slowly as trust grows. That's the whole method. But underneath all of it runs one principle that makes it work, and here it is. The single most important principle of this entire conversation is this. It is not about persuading your parent to do what you want. It is about understanding what they want and showing them you're on their side in getting it. Read that again, because almost everyone gets it backwards. Most people approach this conversation as a persuasion problem. How do I get mom to agree to move, to accept help, to stop driving, to do the thing I've already decided is right? And the moment your parent senses that you've come to persuade, to steer, to manage them toward a conclusion you've already reached, they will resist because no one wants to be handled, least of all by their own child, least of all about their own life. But when your parent senses that you've genuinely come to understand, that you actually want to know what they want, that their wishes are the point and not an obstacle to your plan, that you're an ally in their life rather than a manager of it, everything softens. They open up. They let you in. Because you've made the conversation safe. The entire difference between the families who navigate this well and the families who end up in bitter standoffs comes down to this one thing. Whether the parent experiences the conversation as being done to them or with them. Come to understand, not to persuade. Be an ally, not a manager. Get that right, and everything else in this video becomes possible. Get it wrong, and none of the techniques will save you. This channel exists to help families have exactly these conversations before they become emergencies. The hard talks, the costs, the decisions, and everything no one prepares you for until you're already in the middle of it. If this gave you a way to start a conversation you've been dreading, or the courage to start it a little sooner, that's the whole reason it's here. Subscribe so the next video reaches you before you need it, not after. These are meant to be the things you're glad you did a year early, instead of the things you wish you'd done in time. And do one thing for me before you go. In the comments, tell me, have you had this conversation with your parent yet? Or is it still the one you're avoiding? You are far from alone in this, and you might be surprised how many people are carrying the exact same unspoken conversation tonight. And if you know someone who's been putting this off, share this with them. It might be the nudge that helps their family talk, while there's still time to talk calmly, instead of in a crisis. One important note before I let you go. I'm not a doctor, a lawyer, a financial advisor, or a therapist, and nothing in this video is professional advice for your specific situation. Every family is different, and the legal and medical pieces of this, wills, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, care decisions, should be handled with the appropriate professionals who know your circumstances and your local laws. What this video gives you is a way to open the human conversation. The professionals help you handle the formal parts once that door is open. So here's where I'll leave you. The conversation you're avoiding will happen one way or another. That much is certain. The only thing you get to choose is whether it happens now, calmly, on an ordinary good day, with your parents still in control and their wishes still fully theirs to express, or later, in a hospital corridor, in a panic, with everything forced at once and no one sure what your parent would have wanted. Those are the only two options. There is no version where the conversation never has to happen. So choose the good day. Choose it while you still can. It will be uncomfortable, and you'll want to put it off one more time. And every instinct will tell you there's no rush. But the families who are grateful in the end are always the ones who had the courage to be uncomfortable a little early, instead of devastated and unprepared a little too late.